All right. Well, since we have a lull in the conversation, now it's perfect time to go ahead and start. It is 8:01. It is January 22nd, 2019. We're here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation for the Energy for All Alaska Task Force meeting, and we are now live at Budokai and being recorded. So our guest this morning is Mr. Mike Kraft of Delta Wind, creator of the Delta Wind Farm down in Delta, Alaska. Here to give us an update regarding the project. Just as a peculiar coincidence that we just discovered, turns out Mike and I not only grew up in the same hometown, I can't believe I'm only finding this out, I've known you for almost 15 years, in the same hometown. We actually grew up in the same neighborhood. His mom lives on the same street as my mom. We went to the same elementary school, the same high school, and even swam in the same swimming hole on Fort Eustis there in Newport News, Virginia. So, Mike, homeboy, thank you for coming. Please.
Well, everybody, I was trying to figure out how to start this, and I decided I would kind of give a little history. My name is Mike Kraft. I lived in Fairbanks, Alaska. I've lived here almost 40 years. I came here in the late 70s in the military and fell in love with Fairbanks, and somehow talked my girlfriend, who later became my wife, into coming back with me in 1980. And we got here, we had 16 bucks, and we spent 12 of it on laundry and camped behind what is now Denny's. It was Flippers back in those days. And that's how we got our foot in the door in Fairbanks, Alaska. And pretty quickly we started having kids. We ended up having 4 children. I couldn't make money, so I started building houses. And then I kind of figured out I could make a living building houses. So at this point in time, if you look on the recorder's office, you'll find my wife's signature and my signature on about $30 million worth of development that's taken place in Fairbanks, Alaska. And that has kind of led me to see things a little different than the average person. We've built hundreds of home sites, lots and lots of houses. We run a gravel pit operation here in Fairbanks. And in 2005, I started having concerns about the future of Fairbanks for 2 reasons. One was I was concerned primarily about the economics of living in Fairbanks and what kind of opportunities might be available for my kids that wanted to stay here. And it wasn't looking pretty. And as time went on, it became clear to me that we also had some really serious environmental issues facing us here in Fairbanks. And so I started thinking about, was it time to leave? Was it time to take my family somewhere else? Was Fairbanks even going to survive the long run? And I decided I wanted to stay here. This is my home. We had pretty deep roots. And so I started realizing that renewable energy was something that was being asked for on multi-levels. The federal government was pushing it. The state of Alaska was pushing it. Our own utilities, Golden Valley Electric Association, had done several surveys where they were told by their co-op members that they wanted it, to the tune of 85% of the people that were asked wanted renewables. And so I thought, okay, well, I can move dirt. I know where the windy spots are. I've been hunting here for 35 years. I know it's windy in Delta. I know it's windy in Healy. These are the 2 places I started looking. So I bought land in Healy and I bought land in Delta. I put up 2 med towers. We did wind studies with 50-meter towers. That was about a $250,000 proposition. Worked with ABS Alaska Battery and got the right data logger equipment and figured out exactly what had to happen to get a wind study that would be good enough to finance a multi-million-dollar wind farm project. So in the end, Delta Junction was clearly the place to put a wind farm. It had a stable wind regime. It had private property that could be acquired, which was a huge issue, seeing as how less than 2% of Alaska is owned by the private sector. So Delta Junction had the main thing Delta Junction had was it had the interconnection to the rail belt grid. By that time, Pogo had put in the 138 kV line that served Pogo, and it also served the pump station down in Delta Junction and Fort Greeley. So we had an interconnection of 138 kV transmission line that was sending power one way. And so that was probably the thing that put Delta Junction over the top, was the fact that we didn't have to build 100 miles worth of power line to get a wind farm project built. So we put up that Northern 100, the smallest, the turbine kind of in the middle of the picture, was the first grid scale turbine that went on the rail belt grid, and that happened in 2005. 2 years later, we put in the first 900. That's about the time that Eva Creek wind farm was proposed. And a year later, we put in the second 900 kilowatt turbine. So we produced basically just right at 2 megawatts of electricity with the wind farm. At this point, we have almost 10 years worth of operational experience, Alaska Environmental Power. We have actual throughput data versus something that would be based on estimates off of the med tower, because when you do a wind study, you're making assumptions. Okay, it really is. It's a guess. It's an educated guess, but it's a guess. When you have 10 years worth of throughput, those are actual things that happened. Those are, because you have mechanical issues with these turbines. There's efficiency losses. There's all kinds of things that happen in the real world that you can't count on all that. You can't see all of it when you're making a guess off of a med tower. This year we hit a 31.8% capacity factor in Delta Junction with that turbine. If that turbine, I'm talking about the 900.
I'm sorry, say that again.
31.8% capacity factor. That was a throughput number. That's exactly what we sent into the grid.
Right. And when you say
capacity factor is if that turbine ran 100% of the time, 24/7, 365, that would be 100% capacity. What we were able to get out of it was 31.8% of what it could potentially do over the course of an entire year. And in the wind world, that's pretty damn good. I pay $40,000 a year for our operations and maintenance agreement on those turbines. That includes parts. It includes it's with the manufacturer, actually. Yeah, EWT. They come 3 times a year and do service work, and then any faults that happen, anything that comes up in the meanwhile. And that also provides insurance for major component losses or any kind of serious stuff that comes up. They guarantee a 95% availability with that contract. Those turbines basically are 54-meter rotors on a 900 kilowatt turbine. They make another turbine now that has a 64-meter rotor. A 64-meter rotor on that 900 kilowatt turbine in Delta Junction would probably equate to about a 37% capacity factor. One of the reasons we know we can go with a larger rotor is because we have never recorded a wind above 78 miles an hour. That's a very important thing to have, because if you have too high of winds at a wind farm, your turbines get kicked offline. That high number is basically 25 meters per second, which is about 57 miles an hour. So anything at 57 miles an hour or higher, there's not a turbine on the market that will make power under those conditions. When that happens, the turbine basically comes up, and to protect itself from going into an overspeed or some kind of catastrophic load issue, they feather out of the wind and they go into survival mode. In the case of like Eva Creek, for example, that means that you have a 24 megawatt drop. That's a problem. It's called swing. And if you're swinging the grid with your wind farm to that degree, it's pretty hard to incorporate that wind into your system, because it happens very quickly in a matter of a minute or less. And we don't have that at Delta Junction. We've had one overspeed event per year, every year that we run that wind farm. So this particular wind regime, according to the guys that maintain my turbines, and they work on turbines all over the planet, Delta Junction is a world-class wind regime. It's one of the best sites in the world that these guys know of. The production there, I have events there that last 18 days. Typically, they're in the winter when we need the power the most. We have 90-hour events where we're at 97% capacity for 90 hours solid. These guys in Europe can't believe it. They can't believe that these turbines can run that hard. And the other nice thing about it is they're running in the cold so they don't get hot. Typically, if that turbine was in Wales and ran that hard, the bearings would get hot, the converter would get hot. They would have all these problems. They would have to start curtailing the output of that turbine at some point because it would be overheating. We don't have that problem in Delta Junction. It's usually pretty doggone cold. So it's a very unique place for a wind farm. With that said, you know, I now have 4 grandchildren living in Fairbanks, and quite frankly, I'm a little concerned that they've had to stay at home for the last couple of years on many occasions because of asthma issues, because of problems with our air. When you wake up in the morning and you get the report, don't let your mom out of the house today and don't do anything strenuous. And by the way, if your kids can't breathe, you can take them to the hospital, to the breathing room. There's something wrong here. And so, you know, I've had a little bit of a tussle with Golden Valley over this wind farm. I think everybody knows that. A lot of it hasn't made sense. I've gone to the RCA. I won an RDoC, brought ourselves into compliance with PURPA, federal law. That kind of got ignored. But nevertheless, our air quality is now driving this bus. In December, we have a SIP due, which means we have to have some plan in place to mitigate this air quality issue. And I really did hope that the IGU was going to be able to deliver on that. And I don't believe that IGU can at this point because it doesn't reach enough people. My hat's off to you guys that are developing this gas project. I hope you're successful. But from the meetings I've been to, and I've been to a lot of them, I just don't see where this IGU project is going to get us to a cleaner Fairbanks in any near term. That said, you know, we went to the governor, and when I say we, I'm talking about 5 private people in Fairbanks, went to the governor and pitched the idea of why doesn't IGU do something with propane on an ancillary project? They are a nonprofit. They could bring propane into Fairbanks and serve everybody that has a driveway that isn't going to have access to these gas lines. Well, ADA didn't like that. IGU didn't like that. And the governor didn't have the kahunas to push it. And the governor asked me, he says, well, why doesn't the private sector do it? Why doesn't the private sector bring propane into Fairbanks? So here we are. This wind farm is a qualified facility under federal law. The utilities have to buy the power at their avoided cost. Golden Valley said to me in this last go around, if you spend the reserve for the wind, if you have a battery to make the transition, we will buy the firm power. So that gave us the opportunity to bring propane into Fairbanks as a way to spend reserve for this wind farm. This wind farm is going to be near 40 megawatts of power. We plan on spinning the reserve with propane in Fairbanks to create an opportunity to take propane to the outside market of Fairbanks. Anyone that has a driveway, we want to bring propane because we think propane can get us out of this air quality issue. We also think propane is probably one of the cheapest fuels you can get your hands on. I mean, if anybody does their math and looks at the world market on propane, there's a glut of it. They can't get rid of it. Yes, sir.
Could you explain how propane is spinning reserve?
Yes. Well, let's do this first. So what's our capacity right now?
For what?
Right now, your output.
Oh, I put out 2 megawatts.
2 megs. Okay. Okay.
We have site control over a square mile there. The way we're going to spin propane is we're going to use...
Finish the answer to that. Are you putting up many more towers?
Oh, yeah. And the towers we're going to put up are actually 4 megawatt turbines. They are a class 3 turbine, which means they have a larger rotor to generation swept area. It's kind of like me putting a bigger blade on these turbines. What that'll do for us is that means that we can pick up the energy in the 4 and 5 and 6 meter range of wind, whereas now we don't get much out of that because these turbines are designed to run in faster winds. So by going to a larger rotor size on a generator, we were able to pick up a lot more power on the low side. So that means, like in the summertime, for example, instead of having a 17% capacity factor in July, we'll have a 22. Overall for the year, instead of having a 31.8, we should hit 40%. So we're going to pick up a lot more power on the lower side. We don't need any more fast wind. We got plenty of that. It's the lower winds that we're trying to capture. So by the way we want to spin reserve is we want to use 11 5-megawatt, 200-ton motors in Fairbanks. These motors are going to burn propane and biodiesel. They're motors that are designed for cargo ships. They're pretty unique motors. They're 18% more efficient than any motor on the market because of their design. Those motors will do two things. They are designed to follow wind. They react pretty quick. They also are going to provide heat. We want to be able to sell the heat off of these motors to places like Costco or whoever else wants to buy cheap heat, because we're going to have excess heat off these motors. That heat will be sold on the open market to whoever wants to buy it. The electricity will go to Golden Valley. We are not looking to cut Golden Valley out of this scenario. We want to wholesale our electricity to Golden Valley at their avoided cost. The advantage of using these propane motors is the heat, and also the condensing side for refrigeration. Anybody that's doing a lot of refrigeration in the interior will also be able to get their condensing work done off of these motors. So it's actually, there's three products that come off the motor. There's condensing for cold, there's heat for space heating, and the electricity that would go into Golden Valley system. We feel like that'll create a large enough market to where we can use what's called an aqua train. An aqua train is a system where you have rail cars that are 33,000 gallon cars. They are loaded onto a barge in British Columbia. They're filled up with propane. They're brought to Alaska, and they're brought to the interior via the railroad, and they can be stored on any side rail anywhere in the interior, and they can sit there for years. These are pretty serious containers. The advantage to propane is it doesn't have parasitic loads in the storage of it. The idea is that we would bring thousands of tanks, smaller, like 1,000 gallon tanks that could be buried at consumers' houses. We know that if you convert your dryer, your hot water heater, and your stove, that's 110 amps of electrical load right now. Those can be converted directly to propane. That's a 66% increase in efficiency in the use of energy. Even if the price of the fuel was the same as electricity, you're going to get twice as much work out of that propane as you would electricity because of the efficiencies of it. You can also heat with it through a condensing boiler. Those are really efficient boilers. You don't have exhaust, you don't have PM 2.5, you don't have sulfur dioxide. A lot of our air issues completely go away with propane. We can bring it in the summertime when it's the cheapest price. We can fill all these tanks up all summer long. We can bring enough in the fall to have enough to get through the winter sitting here in Fairbanks, and we feel like that we can serve the customers. We also plan on financing anyone that wants to convert their house to propane. We have a bank that signed up with us to do that, and that'll be pay as you go on your bill. The meters for propane will be a credit card meter. You swipe your credit card and the meter opens up at your house. There'll be a tank buried in the yard, and we'll make sure that that tank stays full. And by spinning the reserve for the wind farm, that gives us the baseline market to bring an aqua train of propane to Fairbanks at high volume, low margin marketing strategy. Obviously, we want to compete with number one, firewood, number two, diesel, and we want to compete with Fairbanks natural gas. There's no doubt about it. We're here to compete. And so the only way we can be competitive is to be the cheapest. And that is our goal, is to provide the cheapest energy that we feel like will help us get out from underneath of this air quality issue.
So let's talk about base project. So that did answer one of my questions regarding the spinning reserve. So it's a distributed spinning reserve.
It's a distributed energy scheme.
Rather than putting a whole bunch of propane generation on site with the wind farm.
Correct.
Distribute around Fairbanks.
That way
or around
you
the
get
market.
to take the heat. We can use the heat that way. We can use the refrigeration potential off of it that way. And it also means that you have a diversified energy system where any single point of failure is pretty limited. You're not going to take the whole system off. It's spread out.
Now, is there a base amount of that kind of propane generation you require?
Yeah, we're looking at 11 5-megawatt units in Fairbanks to back up the wind.
55 megawatts.
Right, and that's the Golden Valley project. There are two projects here, by the way. One is the Golden Valley project, and the second one is a project based on Doyon. We've applied for interconnection with Doyon. Obviously, Doyon serves Fort Wainwright and Fort Greely and the missile defense. That's the second project that we're bringing forward at the same time. It's very similar to the one we proposed to Golden Valley in scope and size. And basically, we realized that two things. Doyon was supposed to fix this coal plant. They've had 7 years to do it. It hasn't happened. There's a problem there. The military, I mean, you talk to the military, there's some strife going on between Doyon and the military. You can't make this stuff up. We feel like that we can help Doyon by bringing 11 units to Doyon and spinning the reserve for additional wind and delta, and a combination of wind and propane on a distributed energy scenario at Fort Wainwright. We'll make Doyon, put them in the driver's bus. They'll have something to sell for the next 50 years. Whereas right now with the coal and the power plant, I mean, we're looking at, nearest numbers we see was between $70 and $140 million worth of upgrades that would have to happen to that coal plant to operate it. And then we're still married to emissions and coal ash. So we haven't really solved a lot of problems there, and we're going to pay a lot more to get it. The same thing with Golden Valley. You know, they've got people, I don't know if everybody realizes this, but when Healy 2 runs for 18 months, there is a consent decree between the EPA and Golden Valley to make improvements to all of their power plants. It's part of their license to operate Healy 2. That's another huge chunk of money that we have to spend to upgrade these old plants. That's going to drive our utility rates up. Our base rate is going to go up. Our avoided cost on the purchased fuel and power. When you start having to run low sulfur diesel, or you start having to scrub all your chimneys because of the fuel you were using, that is going to drive up our utility costs. If we go with this other plan, number one, the base rate will never change because it's not public money anymore. It's a private money that's being put out there to deliver these products. It eliminates public risk, and we think we can bring the rates down because it's going to be cheaper in the long run to do it with somebody else's money. So those are a couple of advantages. Yes, sir.
With this distributed energy, you've got to place it somewhere.
Yes.
Don't you have some kind of constraints? I mean, you can't just plunk down a 5-megawatt power plant in the unit,
Right. No, there are definitely constraints.
Got some safety.
There are definitely constraints.
So it's kind of limited in that sense. I mean, I think Fort Wainwright's kind of got it made, but.
Well, there are places, there are plenty of places in
You can't put it
Fairbanks.
next to Costco, for instance. You mentioned Costco.
Right.
You can't really do that. And how do you use the heat if you've got that constraint?
Well, you're gonna have to pipe the heat. There's no doubt about it. And I'm not gonna sit here and say that we have got 11 sites identified exactly where we're gonna put them.
Can you give us a rough dimension of size?
Yeah, they're just slightly bigger than a Connex container, and they're 40 foot tall and they weigh 200 tons. They're 400,000-pound motors.
And where are they built?
They're built in Germany.
So Connex footprint, 40 feet tall.
Yep.
So pretty small footprint, but tall.
Yeah, they're tall.
And that's for 5 megs?
That's 5 megawatts.
5 megs.
Are they walk the show?
Pardon me?
Are they walk the show?
I'd rather not say at this point. That's
What was the question?
what
Brand.
particular kind of motor.
And is there a levy, as was said, is there a
Is there a way?
levy distance,
Well, I mean, obviously, we're not
For
going
the propane, I would think not.
Yeah.
No,
right,
obviously, we're going to have to,
storage
we're going to have to concern with ourselves with the noise. There's restraints on the noise. There's definitely issues there. There's restraints on the foundations as far as anti-vibration. I mean, you get 400 ton shaking. That's quite an impact.
The neighbors call and complain.
Right. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to address for sure.
Yeah.
But all that's doable.
And it's been done. You're linked up with this other firm. They've already done this elsewhere.
Actually, there is a project in Hawaii that's doing this. And there's another one at another different military base.
So we have a question from Mr. Hayden.
Yes, sir.
The locomotives on the rail, they're a 2.5 megawatt generator.
Yep.
Well, that gives you a general idea of the size.
Yep.
Golden Valley has 2 of those downtown for Black Star. When you're talking 5 megawatts, though, like, I'm thinking of the food bank.
Mm-hmm.
They have a heat and power unit. It's 50 kW.
Right.
Which matches their electric load and their heating load. They've talked about using absorption for the cooling of their refrigerators in the summer. To me, a 5 megawatt load is a big load.
It's a big motor. I mean, a 1 megawatt motor is a V12 diesel motor. That's 1 megawatts.
Costco is probably less than a megawatt.
Just south of a megawatt, probably. Yeah.
So to find a 5 megawatt site, I look at the university or Fort Wainwright or Fort Greeley or some large installation.
The reason for the 5 megawatt units is because of the heat density of it.
Sure.
We want to be able to sell the heat. The heat is a big product, big part of our.
Can you do mini district heat setups with that?
Yes.
So you can
Yes.
2 or 3 buildings.
Exactly.
So East Fairbanks could be a
Yeah, you could do a heat loop. There's an opportunity to do a water distribution system. Keeping that from freezing. There's all kinds of scenarios where this could be applied. But the idea of the reason for the big motors is the efficiency of the motor itself. That's what's driving us with that motor.
I'm having a terminology issue. I think of motors as electric and engines as
We had this.
internal combustion.
Right. These are internal
These
combustion.
are big engines. Okay.
That basically the ignition process works with biodiesel as the igniter, and propane is ignited by biodiesel under compression. That's how these motors operate.
Engines.
Yes, sir.
Mike, would you plan on kind of running those big engines at load in their sweet spot all the time? So
No.
they were efficient?
No, they're
You gotta
actually
back them down
they're actually-
when the wind's blowing.
they're designed to follow the wind. They're super long stroke, low RPM motors.
How do you get the estimate of wind?
Well, you might have to run that motor. There might be some excess power there. I mean, if it's 40 below zero and there's no wind, obviously you're gonna have to run the motors pretty hard.
So that's,
Yeah.
I think, efficiency.
Yeah. It's gonna be spread out over the entire season. Yes,
Mike,
sir.
when you say you're competing with the avoided cost for Fort Wainwright and GVEA, are they negotiating at the coal price or the diesel price?
No, they pretty much, in the last go-around, they described what that number is.
Okay.
And they, in basically, killing the last 13.5 megawatt interconnection request I made, they came and said, well, if it was firm, it would be worth this.
Okay.
And I'll leave that up to you guys to do your homework and find out what that number is.
All right.
Now, just FYI for everybody, we just got an increase in our rates. And one of the increases we got was we were paying $20 per kilowatt for capacity. That's a high number. That's our demand fee that we pay as consumers on a commercial account. So there's 3 things that you're entitled to under federal law as a qualified facility. One is the avoided cost for the purchase power, the capacity factor, the actual capacity itself has a value, and then any increases in efficiency of the system. Now, our company really doesn't need all 3 of those. We would like to negotiate a deal with Golden Valley, and we put that on the table with them. If they want to do that, then we'll meet with them. We're not going to do that after the 28th of February, though. They have till the 28th of February to respond to our request for interconnection. So does Doyon. They have 60 days according to federal law. And we sent them a letter and said, if you want to negotiate a deal that's better than what we're entitled to, now's the time to talk about it, not after the 28th, because that's just a stalling tactic. I've been there, done that. We're done with that. So if they want to make a deal, now's the time to do it, not after the 28th. And I don't mean to be cold about this, but you know what? My grandkids are being hurt here. And anybody in Fairbanks who wants to hurt my grandkids and not deal with this crap and get this air quality fixed is at war with me. And I'll make no bones about it. This is my family's house too. And I'm sick of watching nothing happen. Nothing has happened to fix this air quality issue in Fairbanks. We can't drink our water, and we can't breathe our air. I mean, come on. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket to figure out something is wrong here. And I'm looking at the fact that I can't sell land in this town. I can't suggest to my son that he build a house in this town right now. There's 2 million square feet of commercial space sitting empty in this town right now. Am I missing something?
What kind of permitting challenges are you going to need?
You have to have air quality permits for the motors.
Yeah. Okay.
Everything else is unregulated. Propane is not a regulated industry. We can operate this wind project in conjunction with the propane motors without a certificate of public convenience because we're a qualified facility. So the rest of our projects are unregulated and can't be regulated.
Mike, this is Patrice online.
Hold on, Patrice.
Oh, I'm sorry. Transporting the propane by rail or?
That's not regulated. Patrice?
Oh, hi, Mike. Could you talk, if you get the tariffs, could you talk a little bit about the timeline that this can all come into play?
We're ready to start ordering motors, and we've already made arrangements with the turbine manufacturers. There's about 400 construction jobs that are ready to kick off. Concrete is we're ready to do dirt work in Delta Junction right now. As soon as we have a contract for the power, either from Doyon or Golden Valley, we're ready to kick this project off. The financing is already in place. We have some of the workforce already set up. We've negotiated with shipping units, and that type of stuff is already in place. So we're ready to go.
All right, thank you.
To have it up and running, maybe 1 year, 2 year, 3 year.
It's good. It's probably 1.5 years out to have it completely up and running. Yeah. Okay.
If you start when?
This spring. A lot of the work has already started. A lot of it is negotiating for the towers, for example, getting the equipment ordered, the motors, that type of stuff.
So can you,
Just a little detail here. You mentioned that you have a financing plan available from a bank to do conversions of individual houses. What are we talking about there? How much capitalization? How much is you thinking it's going to cost? And
it's going to vary from house.
It's been an issue with.
It's going to vary from house to house. I mean,
obviously,
obviously, if someone just wants to put a condensing boiler in their house, that's kind of a number. And obviously, each house is going to be different. It's going to involve a propane tank outside. It's going to involve some amount of piping in the house. Depending on the age of the house, the type of structure that it is. So I mean, it's going to vary from job to job. And so we've got a bank that's willing to finance projects that we can make happen. And obviously, the low-hanging fruit is going to be the ones we go for first. As that gets filled in, and we probably will start looking at the more difficult situations, you know, whether it's somebody that has a log house that has venting, you know, I mean, there's just such a variance of homes in Fairbanks. It's hard to say, well, here's the boilerplate number, because it's not possible. That's just not possible. So we're going to be looking for the ones that are easy to do. Those are obviously the ones to do first. I mean,
Again, it'll be payback on the bill.
correct.
On bill financing?
Exactly.
From a customer perspective.
Yeah.
I was wondering how scalable the project is. Can you start at a smaller, I mean, if you have, one of the issues I think you're going to run into is siting these engines, the spinning reserve engines. Can you do the project at half the size?
Well, I think siting them for distributed heat. We've got plenty of land if you're just gonna drop them in just to chase them in. I'm excited to, you could actually use that extra commodity.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea is to develop a demand for propane. That's our scheme
Right.
here.
Right.
The greater demand we can create for propane, the cheaper we can bring propane.
Yeah, I
to the
understand that,
area.
but my question is, can you start at a smaller scale?
Well, I think we could, yeah. We could start at a much smaller scale because of the wind. We have a pretty good wind regime, and the turbines that we're gonna be putting up down there are much more efficient than the turbines we've been operating. And quite frankly, wind is our key. The more wind we can put into the system, the better the economics of this whole plan are, because that is the cheapest resource we have.
So the heat's a byproduct,
Heat is a byproduct.
that you're not really chasing, it's just free.
Well, no, we're chasing it because it has a value.
Right. Not necessity means that.
No, it's not. The avoided cost of electricity is really what the model is. And even if those generators had to go at our site, for example, that's totally doable.
I would think the cost of propane would depend on the scale of the project. The more propane you buy, the cheaper it is.
Correct.
So that's important.
It is important for us to do as much as we can possibly do. And that's why the wind farm is the size that we're proposing, is because that sets up a certain requirement for spinning reserve, which equates to how many millions of BTUs you use of propane. And like I said, push comes to shove, we've got a square mile here to put generators on. I got 80 acres sitting down on Chena Pump Road that's an unrestricted zoning. There's lots of property to put motors on. Yes, sir.
Mike, can you talk a little bit about the propane supply and your perspective on the pricing of it? Obviously, the price of propane is low now, but give us some sense of the source of your supply, the supply chain, the certainty of pricing. I know Canada right now has challenges and is impacting prices, but these things are long-term, and so I hear you talk a little bit about that, if you will.
Well, Larry Osgood is our propane guy. He's one of the leading propane experts in the whole country. He's 1/3 of our company. And to be totally frank, when they want to know something about wind turbines, they call me. When I want to know something about propane, I call him. He is putting together the contracts with the suppliers of propane at this moment. And there are some other discussions taking place. We would like the opportunity to use Alaska propane. That could happen. And I'll just leave it at that. But propane is right now, there's a glut of it on the world. You can buy propane. One of the guys that works on my towers lives in Illinois. He just had propane delivered to his house. It was $1.06 a gallon delivered to his house. We're paying $3.60 a gallon here. So, you can kind of do some math there for yourselves, what the potential of that is. The aqua train is a pretty cheap way to deal with it, barging and the train. Obviously, if we can use the Alaska Railroad, I don't think they're going to complain about freight, potential to haul freight. I don't think any of the companies that are running the barges are going to be too upset about 10 extra barges a year. So that's the biggest component of moving that propane is the transportation of it. It's not the buying of it. There's guys in Canada right now that can't drill because there's too much propane in the way. It's in the way. They want to dump it. They want to get rid of it. We're not doing anything with it in Alaska, which is kind of sad. What's really interesting to me is I just recently found out we could be making propane in Alaska, and we could have been doing it for the last 20 years. And we never did it. Pretty sad. Sitting here choking to death. We can't get any Alaska propane to bring down the cost of our energy. So a lot of this stuff, Rick, it's intellectual property that we don't want to give up. We're not going to give it up. I made that mistake before. And I'm not here to ask for permission on this. I'm not asking anybody's permission to do this. I'm just telling people what we're going to do. And I told you why we're going to do it. And I'm also telling you that the federal government is gonna make us do it. So,
They're gonna make us do something.
that's right. That's what this discussion is about today.
And in moving on the railroad, those tanks have been running around Canada and the United States because we realized that they haven't been doing natural gas.
Right.
So.
Propane is an accepted cargo on the rail.
Okay. And probably has run some, just they haven't done it any scale you're imagining.
Right. And we're talking about a whole train load of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you would actually do a full train.
Yeah.
Hey, Miss Lee, if you please put yourself on mute. Thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You know, Golden Valley has an obligation to buy power for its cost, but they don't have an obligation to buy into the quantity. How are you gonna deal with that? I mean, 55 megawatts.
Well, I'm hoping that the consumers chime in here, because if we have to upgrade all their power plants and start running, low sulfur diesel, I'm pretty sure your electric bill is gonna double. So you want to see your electric bill double in the next 2 years because we had to deal with these environmental issues, or you want to convert to a different, supplier of electricity that Golden Valley can use to power all our homes? So, I mean, that's where we're at. If we have to upgrade every single power point source in the interior, which is that's what's on the books right now.
What's on the books, it's what's being talked about, right?
It's what's being described as the SIP. And then, of course, the FIP, the Federal Implementation Plan. If we don't have something concrete, not some pie in the sky thing, but something concrete to offer the EPA come December, they're the ones that are going to be telling us what to do. It's called best practices. And that includes Fort Wainwright. It also affects those F-35s right there. You know, I was at the Borough of Chambers where we talked about the fact that 3,500 more people in our community is not going to help our air quality. It's cars, and it's not just wood burners. We live in a thermal inversion that has created this problem. We've gone from 26,000 people back in the late 70s to 100,000 people, and we live in a balloon. And our environment cannot disperse the amount of pollution that 100,000 people create. We have got to go to a cleaner fuel source. Our economy is never going to grow. It can't. And the minute that F-35 issue comes up, their environmental impact study is going to find that to be the case. So it's going to be tough for us to expand our economy unless we do something about using cleaner fuel. I mean, you make this stuff up, you know. Yes, sir.
The 50 megawatts is what you're talking about, Mike.
Yes, sir.
The Anchorage Fairbanks Intertie is 75 megawatts.
Right.
And I think Golden Valley right now averages around 30 or 40 megawatts of incoming energy from Anchorage.
Actually, I don't think they're buying any right now.
Well, they might not be.
Yeah.
But in the past,
Ever since Healy 2 fired up, they quit buying it.
okay. And also in the past, there was another proposed Kirkwood plant in Healy for about 50 megawatts before they built Healy 2. So it's been out there as a possibility, and that's the size that's always been talked about.
Isn't it also true that most of the infrastructure of power production capacity is old and it's going to need replacement anyway? And who the hell is going to capitalize?
That's the point I've been trying to make with these upgrades to all these point sources.
I mean, there's hundreds of millions of dollars worth of capitalization that should be taking place in the next 10 years, and I don't see any way it's going to happen.
Well, if it does happen, it's going to raise our base rates. It's going to raise
Yeah.
the base rate of electricity. I mean, there's two things you pay. There's the avoided cost and the purchased power, and then there's the base rate. The base rate currently is about 10.5 cents. So if that goes to 12 or 15 cents, you still got to buy the power. You still got to produce the power on top of it. So now we're at what, 25 cents a kilowatt hour, 27 cents a kilowatt hour? And we're still burning dirty fuel in a balloon.
Speak for yourself, wait a minute.
Live in that balloon too.
I'm not gonna do that. No, good point.
Yes, sir.
I just went through, just estimating what it would cost if, since I have gas at home, switching to propane. Sat down with Crowley and looked at the 1,000-gallon tank and burying it.
Right.
Capital cost aside, they were gonna charge $3.26 a gallon.
Right.
And I looked at what I pay FNG right now. It would increase the cost of energy about 50%. In other words, that cost of propane, I have to get down to be around $2.
Right.
In order for me to compete with FNG. You're talking about that?
That's our job. We have to get to there.
That's the number that I came up with.
Well, you know, the thing with the market, the way the market sits right now is you've got several people selling propane here at $3.60 a gallon. They're not doing large volumes. They're doing, it's called a high margin, low volume market strategy. We're going to create the demand for a lot more propane. And when you have that demand for a lot more propane, when you can bring it in by the train load, as opposed to a tractor trailer coming up the Parks Highway, that's our job. That's how we plan on getting there. And we realize we have to get there. We have to be competitive. That's the funny thing about this is we have to be competitive.
I just wanted to hear the $2.
Yeah.
It's $2 what you're shooting at, or are you shooting for less?
Well, obviously, we're going to be competitive. We're going to be the cheapest ways. That's the plan here. Is it $2?
I mean, this is commerce, Mike.
Is it $2.10? Is it
Well, I just wanted to
$1.90?
hear $1.50.
Yeah.
We want nice commitment right now.
For very little. And I'll buy it.
Right.
I paid over $4 having it delivered recently.
Well, we want to make our money on wind. That's where we want to make our money. Propane is just a way to get there. So hopefully we can be competitive and attract customers through competitive processes. And I think that's what's missing in the equation right now.
Can you share, Mike, with the group what the avoided cost price is for going down? You said we should go do our homework. Maybe everybody doesn't have.
You know, it's
to do that, to help the discussion.
it's such a
To help you build support for your project long term.
sure.
Right?
Well, I'll give you an example of why it's
Community
difficult to
would be
do.
helpful for
I'll give you an
everybody
example of
to
why
know.
it's difficult to do it. Okay. Eva Creek. Eva Creek came online in 2012. Eva Creek produced 60 million kilowatt hours of power. Okay. I know that Eva Creek cost $90 million to build. 10 million came from the state. The other $80 million was financed through low interest loans. But nevertheless, it still cost us, the consumers, $82 million to build that wind farm. I know that each of their towers has probably a $50,000 a year maintenance and operations agreement attached to it. They have 12 towers out there. So I know there was a cost to the Eva Creek project. But for some reason, Golden Valley said, no, there's no cost to it. It's free. I'm going to use that 60 million kilowatt hours of power, and I'm going to add it to our production, and we're going to use it to bring down the average cost of power. And so then they kick out a number that the average cost, avoided cost, was 7 cents. But they associated zero cost to an $80 million wind farm. So there's fuzzy math involved here. Now, they can throw that fuzzy math out to the public till the cows come home. We're not swallowing it. We're a little more sophisticated than that. We know what their costs are. We know what their capacity costs are. We know what they spend on energy that they buy from Anchorage. We know for a fact that there's a 3.5% loss on that energy they buy from Anchorage. So we're counting on the fact that they're going to come forward with the same types of numbers that they represented in court against the Delta Wind Farm project. And if they do, then we've got a deal. And that's a good deal for the consumer as well.
The court stuff.
Right. Well, you know, I made the mistake of giving away all these fun, fuzzy facts once before, and I got Eva Creek shoved up my butt. And it happened. Somebody else wants to figure it out, figure it out. Not my job.
Anyone have any questions he might be able to answer? Very well.
Mike, help me out. With your plan, if you modeled a scenario, let's say you have 100,000 square foot Fred Meyer at North Pole with one of your engines sitting next door, supplying heat to that building, and that is then the gateway for propane to North Pole.
Mm-hmm.
Have you modeled what the cost at the meter for a family in North Pole would be for your product, for your project? We know what LNG is.
Right.
We're dancing around what, we know what oil is, we know what LNG is. So now a new player comes on the scene, propane. What is your?
Our target is to be the bottom number.
I understand.
That's our target.
Okay, that helps. So what is?
Okay, so the better you do, the harder I'm gonna have to work. And when I mean you, I'm talking about Fairbanks Natural Gas.
Yeah, I understand that.
The better you do, the harder I'm gonna have to work.
I understand that. That's the way it works around here. But that's not my question. So have you modeled what that would be at the meter for the family on Badger Road?
Of course we have.
Oh, good. But could you share that?
No, sir. That's intellectual property.
You have to remember, this is a private sector practice.
It's not something we are gonna share. We're gonna make you work hard, Gary. It's that simple. It's that
For the
simple.
record, Mike, I can assure you they have been working.
Oh, I know they are. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying, we're here to compete. So the more competitive these other projects are, the harder our company's gonna have to work to come in under you.
And that applies to FNG, and it also applies to the people that today are putting oil into tanks.
That's right. Our goal is to convert as much energy consumption as possible in the interior to propane. That's our goal.
How do you get, Rick asked the question that didn't get answered. What is the scenario that allows you to get long-term propane contracts?
Volume purchases, number one.
What would that contract look like vis-a-vis, length? We can get a 10-year.
We're hoping for at least 10 years in our initial, takeoff.
Does that conform with the market in the United States? Are there long-term propane contracts in the United States?
We're not dealing with the United States.
Are there long-term contracts anywhere?
Canada.
Okay, Canada.
I'm gonna leave that up to our propane guy. I mean, that's his job. That's Larry Osgood's job is to get us the best contract on propane that he can get, and I think he's probably one of the most qualified people in the country to do that.
And it's my understanding that long-term propane contracts are not possible. So,
well,
which means you're going to do this. It's a glut today, but it's a scarcity tomorrow. So I just throw those out as.
Let's put this
we can speculate till the cows come home.
Let's just put this a slightly different way. Our two rubs at IGU, at least through my time there, which was in the end of July, were the fact that we needed to nail down a deal just to have a utility owned by the community. So we had to work that out. It took a little while, but we had to work it out. The second thing regarding propane, where again, just no one did come to us with an offer of a long-term pricing regime. A lot of folks had a lot of numbers they could throw out on a spot basis, but no one had come to us with anything on a long-term basis.
Well, I think I know how to answer your question, Gary.
That we could really look at it.
If IGU can get us a gas price that's competitive to what we can do with propane, we're gonna buy your gas, and we're gonna burn your gas. Does that answer the question?
Sure.
So get us a good deal, and we'll buy your gas.
I understand that.
These motors are all set up for it. They'll be hopefully within reach of your pipes, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to try to continue to do something with propane, because gas isn't going to reach 80% of the people in Fairbanks that need it.
That's true. Yeah, so we've got 30,000 plus residential buildings in the community, and we have 13,000 that have solid fuel burning appliances. Not all those can be reached by natural gas.
Right.
Propane Renewable, is that not?
That's the goal, is to meet that market. Not just here in Fairbanks. I mean, there's a huge potential market from Anchorage to here and beyond, all the way to Tok and Dot Lake and Northway, down the Yukon River.
I don't know, but still,
Surviving good.
for a long time, they actually had propane storage still in.
Yeah, I mean, so the potential is not just based on what's happening right here in Fairbanks. That propane can reach a lot of consumers in a lot of different places in Alaska. And if we can get the volume of propane in here to where we can get the pricing down to the point to where it's competitive with other sources of fuel, then that's our target. And we realize we have to do that as a company. That's what's going to make the wheel turn.
It's just fair to people that are listening, for when you make your assertions, that you have to follow it up. You have to finish the sentence. At what cost?
Well, Gary, it's different because you're working with public money. Okay, everything that's been done with IGU is public money. You have to explain yourself. We're not working with public money. This is private sector money. This is private capital being invested by entrepreneurs to achieve an outcome. Okay? The only thing you have to concern yourself with at our project is the bottom line. The rest of it is irrelevant to the public. It's not public money.
It's irrelevant until you ask that family to convert from oil to something else, and then it gets relevant.
They don't have to convert to our product. If we don't offer a competitive advantage to an individual in a free market, why would they? That's the difference here.
I agree.
Yeah, I would think there'd be a market for both, and that may come down to that because LNG is really not competitive for the rural areas,
right.
And I would think there'd be a possibility of a tremendous market there. Of course, if propane could do the whole thing, but the trouble with the LNG is that we already have a lot of the infrastructure in place for it. And, I don't know whether you could use propane with the lines that have already been built. And one of the concerns that I have is, the energy. I mean, this area is very vulnerable if there's a confrontation worldwide, and things are pretty unstable right now. And what worries me is, if we're totally dependent on one type of energy to generate power, and if the power grid is shut down in this whole area, we're in real serious trouble. So in a way, I look at diversity of energy, to allow our survival as a community. If we get in a confrontation, which I hope we never do.
That's one of the reasons that the military is preaching this diversified energy scenario where you don't have a single point of failure.
Right, right.
The resiliency is what they're referring to, and that is the big pitch across the entire Army and Air Force.
Right.
Is they want resiliency.
Yeah.
They want a spread out system that gives them the potential to operate without a single point of failure.
Yeah. Well, with the military buildup, we're becoming more and more of a target if there is a confrontation.
Well, I mean, in the event that there was an earthquake in Anchorage,
right,
which we all know that never happens, if we had several hundred cars of propane sitting in Fairbanks, I think there is an opportunity for us to back up IGU. That does exist. I know that that's a nasty word at this point, but that is a fact. It can be used in that way. We're not counting on that, but it is a potential.
one other comment or question, if you're about to, this public or private thing, which I appreciate it's private equity. You know, as you transition into Gold Valley, and go from Gold Valley buying power, right, then it becomes a cooperative that we all participate in. Right. We're just, you know, and I understand what you're saying about Gold Valley and the Erie Creek thing, is that they sold the Kool-Aid to the co-op members, right, that it was gonna be low-cost power, and they haven't properly publicized the cost of the wind following, right? And the fact that they have to run these things on full and off-peak efficiency in order to follow the wind, and overall, it's not really very cheap. Same thing's going on in Hawaii. They're no longer installing solar panels and stuff in Maui because they've learned that the load following such is the market penetration they have is such that they can't afford it, right? So we have to be careful here, and that's just what my concern is that we want to make sure that we don't force Golden Valley to pay more for power than there are other options, which right now include turning on the unit and bringing power in from 11 or 12
excuse me. Under federal law, we can't force Golden Valley to pay more for power. They don't have to pay us more for power. But they do have to treat us fairly and in comparison to what it currently costs them to produce power. Now, and like I said, we're willing to negotiate on that, Mark, but we're not going to wait until it's after the due date of when they should have responded to that discussion. We've been there, done that. That's a stalling tactic. That's a well-known stalling tactic. Is you wait until it's, you know, you make the appeal in the 12th hour, you know. And we put that on the table with Golden Valley. We're not looking for everything we're entitled to. We don't need everything that we're entitled to be competitive. We just want a fair deal. And we don't want to be jerked around in the process. And that has been the case to date. I make no bones about it. That has been the case to date. So, you know, if they want a better deal than what they're doing now, it's time to come to the table.
Well, the problem I have with all the economic discussions is not incorporating all the other factors. Health, there's really, ICER just released a study that said climate change is going to cost Alaska $300 to $500 million a year in just infrastructure impacts. So there's a lot of other costs that we're going to have to face as a society, not just like what's the cheapest rank power.
Well, that's what's driving my bus right now is I never saw her stop at the bank on the way to the funeral. So it's not about money anymore. It's about health and safety. You know, you can call it environmental concerns. You can call it whatever you want. I mean, it seems like the Republicans can swallow health and safety a lot easier than they can swallow the word environmental. So we can paint this picture any way you want to paint it. The bottom line is people are being made sick in our town from the way we're dealing with our energy issues. And something has got to change. And if nobody else is going to get that job done, my company's going to step up and try to make it happen. And I'm pissed off enough now where I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to start looking at my grandkids. I mean, they're at home today sick. I can't even hardly breathe right now. It's bullshit.
Wally Hickle felt that in every conversation, at least once you need to slap your hand at the table and say bullshit. It'll probably come up. All right. So I think that's a nice way. To end on a more positive note, thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Certainly, it's nice the understanding that, again, we still have folks in the community and in the economy trying to diversify it, drive down costs. Yeah. So I think we're all in the same boat with that one. Sir?
Yeah, have you investigated smaller propane generators? For example, if the community wanted to have heat and power.
The Mars out there, there's 35 kW units that Connect is selling right now, for example.
Or mine operation wanted.
Yes, they've already proven that is a cost-saving advantage over the utility interconnection. I mean, they're running a 200,000 square foot building down in Wasilla right now with a 35 kilowatt Yanmar propane motor that they've taken all the heat off of it. They've heated the building with it, and they completely displaced their their demand on the utility down there, and they saved $160,000 last year.
Okay, that's what
Yeah,
I wanted to hear.
There's no doubt that right now we could put units at our houses and probably save money if we were using the heat. You have to use the combined heat and power to make that viable. So we're already at that tipping point economically where you could probably help yourself.
Okay, do we have any further questions?
Jomo, this is Patrice.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say thank you to Mike for presenting, and to Jimmy, maybe, or whoever else commented on health and safety, because it's part of the economic analysis that just so often gets left out. So thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. Hopefully we can make something happen here and be competitive enough to make a difference.
And we'll keep watching this discussion.
Well, good luck.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, they're different. Market.
Oh, yeah. No, we saw that.
Of course, you've been trying to work.